Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Whiskey Neat, spirited conversations with interesting people. I am your host, Kristopher Hart. Now, we've got a couple of, you're going to notice that the next three introductions all look remarkably similar, and that's because I just got back from Tales of the Cocktail in Louisiana and had a fantastic time, but it was a nonstop shooting session of episodes. This week, I sit down with Kate Perry with Habitation Velier. She is a well-known, long-time industry rum personality and a bit of a protege to Mr. Richard Seale. And of course, kind of let the cat out of the bag there, Mr. Richard Seale is going to be on the show today. So I got to sit down with them in New Orleans at Tales of the Cocktail, and we just talked ramen. But I finally got to sit down with Mr. Richard Seale, another person that I've really dug online and thoroughly enjoyed our interactions. Finally got to talk to him, and we ended up talking for 2 hours. Then we had food for another hour. So it was a really, really good time in Louisiana, and I hope you were all tingling with jealousy. This week's show, let's get to our sponsors. This week's show, as always, is sponsored by Terlato Distell Artisan Spirits. Brands like Bunnahabhain, Deanston, Ledaig, Tobermory, Bains, Black Bottle, and Scottish Leader. They have been a huge sponsor of the show for quite a few months now, and we are such a huge fan. So definitely, if you're looking to get into the realm of Scotch, I've been pimping out Deanston so much on the show because I hate saying this, I know. I couldn't be a bigger fan. Jack's already smiling at me. This week's episode is also brought to you by Belle Meade. Belle Meade's high rye bourbon portfolio offers a variety of taste-tempting expressions, including the award-winning sherry, Madeira, Cognac, Cask finishes, as well as their classic small batch bourbon and new Cask Strength Reserve. I also got to run into the folks at Belle Meade in New Orleans. For those who've never heard of it, Tales of the Cocktail. It is a massive week-long event in Louisiana. I think it's the largest national industry event ever. It's pretty amazing. It's just a week of courses and drinking and cocktails and debates and panels, and so I got to run into pretty much everyone I've ever loved in this industry. Balcones, in 2008, focusing on ingredients and process, they breathed new life into Texas whiskey, earning them worldwide recognition for their products. You can pick up their whiskeys at your local liquor store, or if you're a retailer, reach out to your, all caps, Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits rep. Balcones is big supporters of ours, and we're huge supporters of them, and we have some really exciting things coming down the pipeline for them. Last but not least, Sagamore Rye. Some of America's most famous distillers got their start in the Free State, and now Sagamore Spirit is picking up the torch. Today's production is brought to you by this award-winning Baltimore-based distillery, home of the world's best rye whiskey. See, I did it. It's flawless. Be sure to check out the show, rate and review it on iTunes. You can find out information about the show at mywhiskeyneat.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can also follow Whiskey Pete on Instagram. He's quite the drinker himself. And without further ado, this discussion, I just realized something before we move forward. Sitting down with Richard Seale, I did give him a bit of pushback on some things, only because in my mind I thought, as people are listening to this that agree with one side, they may have follow-up questions that they want to kind of, when they hear his answer to something, they may have a question. So I tried to put myself in their shoes. I tried to give a little pushback to understand the intricacy and the nuance of Richard Seale's stance in regards to additives, added sugar, gimmicks, and so please, when you listen to this, understand that I'm a huge fan of Richard's, and I don't necessarily disagree with him just because I'm trying to pull apart his answer. So I hope it comes across that way. Without further ado, Mr. Todd Grube, longtime co-host, Kate Perry, and Mr. Richard Seale of Foursquare Distillery. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
This is super exciting, and honestly, this is probably one of my, if not my most, for me, the most exciting. And I've been trying to get Richard on my show for a while. You don't make many trips to Texas, unfortunately, but I'm just so glad you guys are here, and I'm excited. I'm hoping that we can provide quite a bit of education on a few subjects for my listening audience. But let's get a drink first.
Sure.
Where do you want to start? Yeah?
Emperor seems like a good place to start.
Emperor's nice and soft.
We opened it yesterday.
That's probably good for the...
Just a touch?
Just a touch.
Are we to admit to our audience how early in the morning this is?
Rum for breakfast. I can't say it's the first time.
Yeah, they won't be hearing this until like 1 p.m. on a Friday, so we're good.
Don't judge us.
Or seeing this at 1 p.m. on a Friday. So what do you guys like? You guys like rum and stuff? Like what's you guys have been doing this for those who don't know, Richard Seale, you've got quite the legacy behind you. Company's named, R.L. Seale. So give a little background as to for those who aren't aware. And then of course, Kate, I want to hear about the waves you've been making your way through sections of the U.S. just rolling out. Some of the best. Rum is going through such like a beautiful moment right now, especially in the U.S., at least in my opinion. There's getting a lot of long, like centuries-old, deserved attention that wasn't getting. That wasn't quite the same. Growing up, I remember.
Well, we used to have it, and then you guys went ahead there. You're a revolution.
Well, I remember you guys. I had nothing to do with that. You guys are just getting the attention you deserve. I mean, even you and I've recently, even a few minutes off camera, just you weren't expecting this kind of attention, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah. We're, the way I like to describe it, don't get me wrong, Barbados very famously in the 17th and 18th century was a huge exporter of rum, and people don't even realize how big. Mid-1600s we were, dwarfed in, little Barbados was dwarfed in production of, whiskey and brandy. But in the modern era, 20th century, it was... very, very difficult.
Is that the 2007?
That's the 2000, yeah. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so the way I like to describe it sometimes is, my grandfather would have had no concept of exporting rum at all. In other words, rum is very much integrated into local society. It's a local drink. It's a drink of, the man in the street. And certainly in his day, the very well-to-do would not have drunk rum. So he would have never had any concept of exporting at all. And then in my father's generation, they absolutely, rekindle interest in meaningful exports. But one of the prime motivations for them was the West Indian diaspora. So again, it was, we're going to export rum, but it's because all of these West Indians who are living in London, or all these West Indians who are living in New York. It's sort of taken to my generation to say, no, actually, we're going to go after those guys who drink bourbon in America.
I think you're doing pretty well at it.
We're going to go after those guys who drink Scotch whiskey. So yes, in that sense, it's just, as I say, my grandfather would be blown away, absolutely
excited,
blown
I bet,
away.
Yeah,
it's just totally beyond. My father he's ecstatic about what we do, and we just did the ISC, and it's a lovely black tie affair, and you go and collect trophies and stuff, and my father, I entered that. We would do it sporadically, but I entered it back again in 2016, and we won the one producer then. And every year since then, my father at the beginning of the year would go, "Have you entered? Have you entered?"
Yeah,
because
he's proud of you. That's awesome.
Well, but the idea that because he knew it from his father's day, and so from his perspective, he's seen it come from a very little local business to black tie affairs, collecting awards
internationally.
It's so for him it's just mind-boggling.
It's like when you I know this is not the same thing, but it kind of reminds me when you tell your parents you want to be an actor and you work for years and then finally you get like some major sitcom and become a household name. Foursquare is a household name, and it's quintessential rum in the rum community.
I wouldn't say it's a household name, but what we do like, which is what we've worked hard for, and I always love to say, like every overnight success, it's taken about 20 years.
Sure.
What we've worked hard is to have a good name, to have a name of, a good reputation. We're still very much
selfishly.
a niche.
Selfishly, we don't, especially coming from the bourbon community, where it's very difficult to get the best products. We don't want people to know. And we say it every time online. I say, "Oh God, you have to try the 2007. It's my favorite release so far." And then everyone else is like, "Shh."
Don't say
we
that.
want to be able to get it on the shelf.
And I would always react with that. Don't worry. Because one of the things I like to explain is, because people do panic about, oh yes, is the pricing going to go? And one of the things I love to explain is, 20 years ago we first started exporting with, Dorley's XO. And, sometimes people ask me, what's my favorite rum? I don't have a favorite, but Dorley's XO has a very special place because we developed that as a high-end, an extension on Dorley's, just as we were starting to export. And, it's sold in UK about £25, $30. So, it's premium, but not in the stratosphere.
Sure.
But it got us a lot of attention, and it was very successful. And it kind of put us on the map as a, reputable, good rum producer. But that's the success that leads to you putting down more cash, you investing in more inventory. Without the
Innovation.
XO, there's no Dorley's 12. Without the Dorley's 12, there's no Foursquare 2004. So each step leads up. And so one of my reactions to people is, yes, rum will get more expensive, but also we're going to deliver more.
Sure.
So like this year, Emperor, 14 years old, that's my oldest release. I hope in a couple of years' time to have a 15 and a 16. And yes, they will be, so a lot of people, for example, there is an initial reaction with some that, Emperor, it's more expensive 2007. And they're worried, is there a price gouging going on? No. Look, it's 14, 2007 is 12. No way I can sell a 14 for the same price as a 12. So I do like to reassure people that way, that what's happening with the success, it's not you're going to suddenly see your same products jump up. So I'm not telling you, okay, pay $100 now for Dorley's XO. What you are seeing is there's an Emperor coming, there's a Hamden coming. Here's a Hamden 2011.
Sure.
A couple of years ago that didn't exist.
Yeah. At least here.
Well, nowhere.
Anywhere.
Oh, that's right. Because under their own label.
So that's what's happening. So you, in a sense, you don't really have to worry. Maybe another generation or two before it becomes stupid money. You're living in the golden era, so don't panic. Just
It definitely feels like
just
that.
enjoy it.
For rum, it feels like this is stupid. I'm gonna say it anyways. The golden era for television was like the mid 2000s with like The Sopranos. Like we started putting out like better than movies, like great shows, and you saw the same thing with Netflix. Just like these phenomenal shows come out, and I think we're still in that era of just like there's something fantastic to watch. If you're into that sort of thing, me and my wife, we love to grab a bottle of wine or a bottle of bourbon, or I love that
Bottle of
stolen
Foursquare.
overproof. Yeah, bottle of Foursquare, and curl up and binge watch our favorite shows. And there just wasn't good. I hated that 23 episode like boring UPN show from like the late 90s, early 2000s. It just like the television wasn't good, and now we're producing like. I'm
struggling with the analogy because I don't watch TV.
Well, it's big here in America. We're huge on TV. So I wanted to have you here to kind of provide some base education over what is happening. There's not just the fact that the Caribbean is seeing this explosive growth and this worldwide love, but there's quite a bit of controversy going on right now, and I'm hoping you can kind of walk us through it, tell us what's going on, what's being the GI, layman terms, and then kind of build up to the real complicated stuff.
Sure. Well, there's a number of angles in which I can sort of explain these concepts. Let me shoot at a few. The first one led into from our just that discussion. A lot of things, like doing things like the GI, is about preserving the integrity of the reputation you've earned. So, that's the key. In other words, if Barbados rum is working hard and Jamaica rum is working hard to develop a reputation, one of the things that you'll always find will happen in anything that's sold, someone will want to borrow that value, that intrinsic value, on basically an ersatz product, a product that doesn't meet the standard, because that's more profitable. And so one of the reasons for codification is about preserving something that you've worked very hard to build.
Generationally, right?
And certainly the bourbon community, I think, would understand this very well. I mean, you are extremely well served by a very rigorous standard.
And even in Texas right now is something there's a fight to call something Texas bourbon. Was it actually distilled there? I mean, they're trying to get out there and make brands be more transparent about what they're putting on their labels, even just in one state.
Well, that aspect is another important aspect that's not necessarily so well, I think, appreciated by the layman, is that there's the economic part. So one of the reasons why you codify as well, and this is not as sexy an argument to sell, but it's very important. You want to preserve the economic value to those who have produced it. So, one of the reasons why you can't, if a bottle of Scotch whiskey, a cask of Scotch whiskey leaves Scotland and it's no longer even whiskey, and I'll explain that if you want, is about preserving the economic value of Scotch whiskey in Scotland. And one of the things that the Caribbean has really suffered from, exploited, and it's not just rum, whether it's rum, sugar, molasses, bauxite, minerals. It's all about the value has been taken away and earned outside. And so one of the things when you codify a GI and you say, listen, this Scotch whiskey needs to be aged in Scotland, and bourbon needs to be aged in bourbon, or creating a Texas bourbon or a Missouri bourbon, it's about saying, okay, you're going to use this name, Missouri, and we're going to obviously, we're going to try and build a great reputation, but then we want the benefits of this great reputation to be economically earned there in the
within
location.
country, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the tragedy is that the Caribbean are the least able to afford this luxury, and sometimes people can look and and see, like, and I hate these words, tropical aged, continental aged, and see it as kind of like a menu option, and I like having this option, but the consumer, but they're not really understanding that there's a severe economic consequence
By choosing something that wasn't
the
tropically
Caribbean can't afford to give you these options, because if you have a product like, take the Hamden, if you're picking up an independently bottled Hamden, 15 years old, you're buying it and you're 15 years old and aged 15 years in Scotland or in Liverpool, you're going to talk about a situation where 90 or 95% of its value went to Europe, and less than 10% of its value went to Jamaica.
Can I play devil's advocate here and kind
Sure.
of push on you a little bit? So the way I would, and I'm sure this has crossed some people's minds, and you may have already responded to this in the past, but when you say that when you you guys sell bulk product to a Shear
Yes,
in
yes.
Amsterdam,
Yeah.
and they age stuff there,
Yes.
and you're totally fine with that. You're just not fine with it being labeled.
Yes, in other words, well, what we want to do is we want to do baby steps. We don't want to be anal. In other words, we're not in a position to, be quite as strong as Scotch whiskey and say, okay, you can't take a cask out. And also, at the end of the day, we don't necessarily want to destroy the heritage that rum was aged outside.
Sure.
So what's currently in the draft GI, and certainly the proposals that are agreed, this is the view of Foursquare and Mount Gay and Nicholas Abbey, is that yes, you would have to declare that age separately, and the mark wouldn't apply. So what would happen is
Well,
if
what does that mean for the?
well, in other words, the certification wouldn't apply. So what would happen is
Meaning you couldn't call it Barbados.
no, you could call it Barbados rum, but you wouldn't have the certification that certified geographically indication
Gotcha.
Barbados rum, because what you've done is you've broken one of those geographic links. So what would happen is if you ship some 10-year-old rum over to Shear, and as I say, we don't want to be anal, it's their rum, they can keep aging it, and let's say they sell a cask at 2 more years, they wouldn't be able to say the words 12-year-old Barbados rum. And the reason for that is that any reasonable person would interpret the words 12-year-old Barbados rum to mean 12 years aged in Barbados.
So it would have
That's
to
why I
say
hate
10
these words tropical and continental. It's
Yeah.
not about tropical and continental. It's about, was it aged at origin or not?
So how do you want it to be labeled? Would it be
So
10-year
what-
Barbados
yes,
rum
correct.
aged for 2 years?
Yes,
And
or you can put distillation dates and bottling dates, and in other words,
Sure.
be fully transparent.
Sure.
And then so what we're hoping to come out of that is to have a shift. So again, as I say, we don't want to take a blunt tool to this and say no, you can't age outside. But what we'd love to see change in the next 15, 20 years, instead of you going and finding an independently bottled Hamden that was 100% aged in Europe, you'll find it flipped completely around. And it's aged mostly at Europe, and the communication's clear. Now, again, let me also be clear. One of the things that, and the audience may not know who Luca is, but the importer of Hamden over in Europe. Again, a lot of it's about semantics, but semantics are important.
Sure.
So, if I say this is a 10-year-old Hamden rum, or this is a 10-year-old Foursquare rum, I'm communicating that this is 10 years aged at Foursquare Hamden. Now, say I'm brand X, and in brand X, I just state I'm Caribbean rum, sourced from the Caribbean. Maybe even I state the distilleries. We're not talking about hiding anything. But I'm brand X, and I'm 10 years old. I write 10 years old on it. It doesn't matter where that 10 years is, as long as it meets the laws of where it's sold.
Sure.
10 years minimum aging. So as long as you meet that, because you've not misled the consumer
At all.
that. You see, once you put that word Hamden, like official brand Hamden, official brand Foursquare, you're saying something about that. And that's what's very important. And again, it all comes back, a lot of it down to economics, because, if we build a reputation, Barbados, Jamaica, or a distillery, and your product is advertised on that, the sale is based on that, that's where the economic value should go.
So, and there are people who disagree with this, and I mean, I know that you have got a little bit of a history with a certain Frenchman, but there are people who are trying to prevent. I know that there's arguments over dosage, that word, but who in the community within the Caribbean is trying to meet what you just said? Everyone's in agreement. And
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you who's not in agreement, or I'll let them speak for themselves. But
Sure.
basically, yes, there is a very strong agreement between Hamden, Worthy Park, and Appleton in the Jamaican side, and a very, very strong agreement between Mangay, Foursquare, and Nicholas Gaby. So we all very share the same philosophy. Yeah, I mean, I was just chatting with yesterday. We were tasting. I was tasting. I'll make you guys jealous. I was tasting some very old Jamaican rum with Joy and the new brand manager of Appleton for this region. And yeah, we chatted on the GIE, and yeah, I mean, these guys are 100% behind it.
And where do we stand as far as progress? When's this being?
Well, the way it works is it's less relevant for you guys in America because you guys don't really recognize GIs. It's a much tougher fight.
It comes down to the trade agreements, yeah.
Correct. In other words, so let me explain a little bit how it works. So what Jamaica has done is they've registered their GI in Jamaica. So there's an intellectual property called Jamaican rum. It's an analog to a trademark. So, you register a brand's trademark and no one can use your name. And when you register the intellectual property Jamaican rum, that means the people who own that police it. And so therefore any product of Jamaican rum sold in Jamaica has to meet the GI. They also have to meet, of course, the national legislation. What the EU creates a mechanism now for you to go and get that recognized in the EU. And so they are in that process, I believe. And so what you do is you go over to the EU and you say, please recognize my GI. And then what will happen is any product sold labeled as Jamaican rum would have to meet the Jamaican rum standard.
Sure.
In the US, it's obviously much more difficult, and the recognition in the US is based on trade agreements, long historical associations.
Which is where we've had those issues with Champagne and Madeira.
Correct.
And port and
exactly.
Even I got had a discussion about a Texas sherry. 2006, for those who aren't aware, is when the US finally started recognizing port, Madeira, Champagne, sherry, and it grandfathered in anyone who was using those terms prior. So you've got brands that were, California Champagne or Texas sherry, who are still allowed to be labeled as such. But even then, that was only 14 years ago, right?
Yes.
So it wasn't even that long ago. And now you want to bring in a new one with rum, and it's like a whole new set of hoops you've got to jump through.
And but the frustration for us is, we'll come to the U.S. and someone will say, well, rum doesn't have any rules. It's like, thank you very much. You don't recognize them. No, the relevance in the U.S. of a GI will be that the rums that meet it will carry the mark. And so if the U.S. doesn't recognize the GI, you would still be able to sell a product as Jamaica rum because the TTB will still approve your label.
No, you could label
But you
it Jamaican.
Yes.
As long as you
meet the TTB rules of rum and origin, but you wouldn't be able to carry the mark if you didn't meet the Jamaica standard.
Sure.
Yeah.
And is there an opposing argument? I mean, what's the opposing argument? Like you said, you don't have to mention who, but what's the argument? What are people fighting against? Whomever that movement might be. Meaning, I'll just flat out ask it. Are people trying to prevent the differentiation in aging? Meaning,
let me take a step back there. There are two common forms of intellectual property for origin. One is known as PDO, which is something like cognac. Bourbon, but for the fact that you can do it everywhere in the U.S., would be a PDO. In other words, a PDO has a very strong geographical link. So you can't write a PDO unless you have rules that tie you very, very strongly to your geography and the local knowledge. The PGI is a little less geographic and a little more reputation. And the classic example of a PGI is Scotch whiskey. And to illustrate that point very well, in Scotch whiskey you can import grain from outside of Scotland and still have a GI because, as I say, the link doesn't have to be as strong. But
it's not grain to glass, as we would say here.
But you still have to have key characteristics coming from the geographical region. So if you look at a spirit making, for example, you can probably pick up 4 areas of geographical link. The sugarcane, which we are not restricting. The water, which we want to restrict to Barbados water or Jamaica water. So like the Jamaican GI has said, the water must come from the Jamaican
Fermentation or cutting?
Both. So the water must come from the Jamaican aquifers. So you can put a distillery anywhere in Jamaica, but you have to, if you're not close to one of the aquifers, you're going to have to buy a long pipeline. So the water, number 2. So you got sugarcane, water, yeast. We live in an era of added yeast. We don't seem to understand it. Once upon a time, all yeast was native. What we've done and what the Jamaicans have done and what we've done is said, okay, we've let the cat out the bag with Saccharomyces. So, of course, all those strains of yeast used in bourbon are not just Saccharomyces, but Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So that's thousands and thousands of strains. So we say, all right, you can still add any Saccharomyces yeast. But when it comes to non-Saccharomyces, it has to be native yeast. So in other words, yeast actually on the sugarcane. So again, we're keeping some link.
Sure.
And then the fourth geographic link, of course, is the climate of the aging. You could probably say there's a fifth one with the wood. So again, Cognac's an excellent example of a PDO. Even the woods coming from a specific region. So the thing about a GI is that either you have it or you don't. And so we've had opposition on all four of those. So when you finish with that, you don't have a GI. There are just some fundamental truths. You either have the link or you don't. If you break all four, you don't have a GI.
So, but you're also saying if you break any of the four, you don't have a GI.
No, what happens is the way it works is that you apply, and these are at the end of the day discretionary decisions. But a PDO would have to have all four ticked. A PGI would not. There's allowed for reputation to come in. And again, as I say, Scotch whisky is a brilliant example of that. They're allowed to use imported grain because the essential characteristics of Scotch whisky are not necessarily driven.
There's a historical precedence there.
Yeah, and that would be, and it's a good illustration of also, bourbon's a good example because in many ways, bourbon is a PDO. Very, very strong, but the minute that you've said, okay, you can make bourbon anywhere in the U.S., you're now more like a PGI.
Sure. So
if bourbon could only come from Kentucky, and the American oak could only be grown in certain regions, not necessarily Kentucky, but we have to get the oak from here, and the grain has to come from here. You're in PDO territory.
Sure.
I think it's also important to mention that you can still do really whatever you want. You just can't call it GI of Barbados rum. It's not limiting anything. It's just saying if you are calling yourself this, it is going to be that.
In other words, we're establishing what those words mean.
So can I ask, all of the ones that you've mentioned that are in support of what you've said so far, the initial GI, are they doing all the PDO standards?
Oh yes, I mean everyone's in compliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm curious, and again, just to push back on you a little bit, the foundation of what you're saying is simply that you'd like to make sure that the economic and identity of the product benefits the country and protects the reputation of products from those countries.
Right. In other words, there's a number of angles you want to achieve. You want to protect the product quality, so that's where quality standards come in. Or little protections. For example, in the Barbados GI, we say rum has to be, an age statement means aging in cask. But we actually specify a cask is 700 liters maximum. Because we don't want people taking your product's reputation and then using clever loopholes. Mm-hmm. So I aged this in a 10,000 liter vat, and I'm calling it 5 years in this 10,000 liter vat, and us in Mangay are using, bourbon cask 200 liters, and some guys saying it's the same age. So you put little things. For example, in the draft Barbados GI, you can't use the word estate unless it literally is estate 100% Barbados sugarcane. So ornamental numbers. In the GI, it says no ornamental numbers. You cannot put that random 25. Yeah. So GI is, yes, it's about quality.
That was a specific reference.
It's about quality. It's about integrity and protecting your product. Yes, a lot of, as I say, one of the things that people don't realize, it's about economics. It's about keeping your, and I'll give you a perfect example of that one. And I do have to mention the competitor, but it's a perfect illustration of the point. So there's a distillery in Barbados that makes the quote unquote rum for Malibu.
Okay.
So in 2001, Malibu sold for $800 million US.
Wow.
And the distillery that makes the rum for Malibu sold a couple of years ago for $12 million US. So tell me who's getting the better deal. I can't give you a better illustration of the colonial model of
taking over.
Raw material leaves at the lowest possible value.
But is there not an argument for the benefit? And again, just because I'm playing devil's advocate does not mean it's my feelings on the subject. Is there not an argument to be said for those, like for instance, Beam Suntory owns, Japanese company owns America. We as Americans, that economic value is staying here. We're still seeing an overwhelming benefit there.
Exactly.
Is there not?
That's because you've written a very good regulation of identity. Well,
would you not argue that owning a distillery in Barbados benefits the country directly?
It all depends, and I'm glad you asked that, because it does lead me into another, as I say, I can come at the GI from a couple of different angles. And so one angle, we talked about the economics, we've talked about the integrity and protecting the reputation. And going along that economic argument, I do give the example of, Mount Gay. So Mount Gay acquired the brand in 1989. And it was owned by an American company before that. And it was very much the colonial model. The rum was made, it was low end, it went in a tanker, and was bottled in America. And probably whatever money was being made by the American company outside of Barbados.
Well,
he means Remy Cointreau acquired the
So Remy acquired it in
No.
So Remy acquired it in 1989. But Remy's ethos of a company is totally different. For them, this idea of bottling outside or aging is totally foreign to them. And they also could recognize what we've been wanting to recognize, and what you're recognizing, that, you have this perception of rum as low end, but they come and they discover this rum and this distillery, and they realize this is a completely artisanal process. This is totally undervalued. And so they spend the next 30 years investing in Barbados. And so today you can walk and see huge barrel reserves aging in Barbados. You can see bottling in Barbados. You see
all benefiting the country directly.
Correct. Huge increase in employment. They just announced their first female master blender, so Barbadian trained. Totally respectful of the Barbados methods. I mean, you got to understand that when we went through, all the producers we've been exporting for a while, but they went through a phase, and it's still largely there. With again, yes, these sugared rums, and I'm not talking about just the one from Barbados. I'm talking about ones from Guatemala.
Yeah.
And they never ever back down. In other words, it's very easy for large corporate interest to say, market's going there, let's do that.
Sure.
And I love my friends at Bacardi, but to an extent they follow the market. So Bacardi didn't have sugar in Superior, but then along the market says sweets in, and so they started creating some sweeter products. And again, Remy kept the ethos, but none of this was written down. They just did it because their company with the right ethos. So Barbados got lucky. And, my family owns, Foursquare. And of course we age in Barbados. And of course we bottle in Barbados. We don't know any other way. But, my dad's 81. Suppose someone makes an offer he can't refuse. There's nothing written to protect it. New entity could come in and they could say, you know what, it's cheaper to age over in Europe. You know what, it's cheaper to bottle over in Europe. You know what,
and
sugar
reduce
sells.
The size of employees.
Yeah, sugar sells. Bugger keeping the integrity of the Barbados rum profile. We're going where the market says to go. And there's nothing written to stop them. So again, that's the GI is not even, it's not just a pure economics. It's not just a pure, doing the right things, age statements, and it's not just all of these things. It's about preserving
the
a way,
culture,
and the nature of the brand and
are there
what
any
it
other
means.
are there any other distilleries besides the obvious one in the room, that is adding additives to that are breaking those rules? Is it just that brand?
I honestly, because I sell, so we were discussing my relationship with Sheer earlier. So one of the things we've done is we don't want to establish 100 different bulk relationships. So we work with Sheer. And one of the bases on which we work with Sheer is complete confidentiality.
Sure.
Sheer needs to give its clients confidentiality, so I don't know who Sheer sells to.
Sure.
And I'm happy with that. I respect that. I respect what they do for their clients, and we have a really close and excellent working relationship. So I can't say and certify to you exactly where rum goes. What I can say to you is what we've done is, and we keep doing. So years ago, we used to ship bulk on aged rum because everyone did ship bulk on aged rum. Now, with a few rare exceptions, the minimum we ship is 3 years old. And I'm hoping to move that to 5 years old. And so in other words, what I'm trying to do is, we don't want to be completely anal and say, you can never age a Barbados rum outside. But we want that when it's aged outside, the substantial part of the aging is local. So, we're working towards that. But sorry, that's a long version of your question. But no, I don't know. But what would happen is, when you have a GI, and let's say it gets recognized in the EU, it creates then that when the product says Barbados rum, it means what it says.
Sure.
And Kate made this point. And Kate needs to stop letting me take all the talking.
Yeah, well, she's actually got to go.
That's never going to happen, Richard.
But I was trying to build up to that massive point that, in other words, the most disingenuous argument about things like GIs is saying, oh, well, you're going to restrict innovation. You're going to restrict us from doing what we want to do. And it's a little bit like saying water makes you wet. We're going to restrict what it means to be Barbados rum or what it means to be Jamaican rum. But some of these things are tautologies. In other words, there's a geographic link. If you're going to tell me that you need to innovate by using a yeast that has no connection to the sugar cane, or you want to use a water that doesn't come from Barbados or Jamaica, I'm sorry, you're just using the term marketing, the term Barbados or Jamaica as marketing. We're trying to say, no, it has to have substance. But to Kate's point, you can do these other things. And the EU, for example, which specifically recognizes GIs, also has a tool which allows you to change your provenance. You see, today we think of origin. We have a very old-fashioned view of the word origin, which is why we call it origin, as in because we have an old-fashioned view that a product is 100% made where it originates. But we live in a very much more complex society now, where grain ships over to here, and one part of the process is done here, and whatever. And so again, I'll give you the example of Scotch whiskey. There is whiskey that leaves Scotland, distilled in Scotland, goes over to France, aged in France, and guess what? Comes French whiskey. Because the EU has Article 14 that says they use the word provenance, not the word origin. Because origin's a little bit misleading.
Sure.
It's old-fashioned. We think of origin where we started. And it's very hard to stop thinking that way. So it's very hard to believe, that's where it was fermented and distilled, so it's forevermore Barbados. But what we are recognizing is that if you take a product and you distill it in Barbados, and let's say you don't use Barbados water, and let's say you bring in some foreign yeast, and let's say now you take it out of Barbados and you age it in some special climate, you can do all those things, but now it has a different provenance. And Article 14 says exactly that. The provenance is where the essential characteristics. So you can take your rum out of Barbados, no one's stopping you. You can go add your secret sauce, you can go and age it in whatever. Now you're going to, where the rules apply. So if you still meet the rules of rum in the EU, you can sell it as rum in the EU. It won't be Barbados rum, but it'll be French rum or whatever. If you now don't even meet the rules of rum, well, then there's still another catch-all, spirit drink, and over here in America you have it, distilled spirit
specialty, yeah.
So again, this notion of restriction, it's really about semantics. And the notion about innovation as well is also very, very stupid. Because, the fact is that, the greatest marketing term throughout all the years of anyone selling a product is new and improved. So people love to take anything that they do and say, it's an innovation.
Sure. It's always an improvement.
Exactly. I'm now aging this rum in, I don't know, acacia barrels. New and improved, fantastic, new, whatever. That's not innovation. It's just gimmicks.
Sure.
Novelty.
Yeah.
So could an argument not be made that oftentimes innovation isn't recognized immediately?
Correct.
And in
Yes.
retrospect, we realize that this was innovative. So is it quick? Do you have a parameter in place or some sort of something to kind of recognize that you may not think something's innovation now, but it might be perceived as innovation later?
Well, the thing about innovation is true innovation. True innovation is generally very hard, and it usually becomes pervasive, in a category. So that's why when you see someone just,
Throwing it out
changing
there.
a cask is just writing an email and say, please send me these casks and fill in. There's nothing particularly innovative about that. Real innovation tends to be hard. One example I love to give, although we got way too much credit on it, we assisted Green Engineering and University of Siena in their project to create basically an improved copper surface, which they, using a very clever marketing term called nano copper. But he basically, in other words, there's an improved catalytic effect. So the catalytic effect is well established for copper, but effectively what they've done is if they have a square foot of copper and you have a square foot of this nano copper, it's about the equivalent of 6 times of ordinary copper, and so we've done that innovation and put that in. That's going to take years before you see the results. And so if in 10 years' time I'm boasting about
Nano copper.
Foursquare 2019, and I start talking about nano copper, and then some other distilleries start to use nano copper. Well, they probably would by then, and then it becomes pervasive. Then we have a genuine innovation, and
Could an argument
a
not be
GI
made?
doesn't stop that, because a GI is about preserving what you do and a geographic link. It doesn't say anything about making better copper. Our GI does say you have to use copper, and the reason for that is because the influence of copper is so well established. But what we haven't done, which is what some other regulations have done, is we haven't gone to really a lot of detail. So we've kind of more written it like, in principle, please use copper. But we haven't gone and said your still has to have a minimum amount of copper, which we could do, but we haven't gone that far.
Sure. I just, I think I would argue that at least within bourbon, bourbon finishing, like what David Stewart set a precedent, that I would consider that innovation.
Yes,
barrel finishes.
Because what's happened is because so many people are doing it, it has absolutely called
And
it
it's
innovation.
bled over to bourbon.
And it's certainly nothing that was obviously stopped in the Scotch Whisky GI. One of the things that's amusing to me is that what finishing has become is a little bit different than what Dave Stewart intended. His motivation for doing it was not about I want to put some sherry in the whiskey. His motivation was I want to age. He's got these American oak aged whiskeys and he wants to use European oak. So I'm not sure if Scotch whisky is allowed to use cognac barrels. They're certainly allowed to use 45 wine barrels. So his a great source of European oak was an ex-sherry barrel.
I believe they are allowed. I know there was some controversy over tequila barrels, which is still
there's still some controversy. But yes, so in other words, a sherry barrel was an obvious choice, and he will say, and he's been quoted on this, where people think a substantial part of the flavor is coming from the sherry. And he said no, it's coming from the European oak, because he also chose relatively young barrels. So that's also why he did it as a relatively short time.
Now, originally, that was his idea, but what it's become,
Yes,
and what we're
it
seeing,
evolved, yes.
is quite a bit of recharging, or so to speak, where you'll have brands like, I love Macallan, but Macallan will recharge a barrel where they'll take a used sherry barrel, add sherry to it.
I don't think that's legal anymore.
Oh, okay, it might have been outlawed.
Yeah.
But it happens in bourbon quite a bit. Now, we're not allowed to call it bourbon anymore, but we're allowed to explain the process. And that's an
Right.
example of where transparency...
That's what I'm saying. It's all again about semantics. So it's not about stopping you from,
Doing
putting your
it.
bourbon in a sherry barrel. But if bourbon has come to mean, and its identity and its reputation has come to mean, New American Oak, then you're right to say, no, we're not going to allow a sherry barrel to be called bourbon. It's going to be a different whiskey. And, that brings me to the point about, why does something as relatively restrictive as Scotch whiskey allow wine barrels? You've got to remember that winemaking is far older than beverage distilled spirits. I mean, distillation is quite old as well, but originally it was not done for beverage drinking, and it was done, sold sold in an apothecary, not in a bar, a distilled spirit. And so the earliest distillers used the available wine casks. And don't forget, there's always these anecdotes that we sort of discovered accidentally that timing wood was good, but that's probably not true in the sense that by the time, rum and whiskey were popular, it was well established that you put wine in wood to improve it. And so it's really not a great leap that distillers would have put, the spirit in deliberately in.
And I have a question around that.
To improve its palatability.
Now, you mentioned when you're describing rum in general that it's something that it wasn't the aristocracy, it was the people. They were making things like with Claren, and each island had their own thing, and that's what the people drank. At what point with Barbados rum was it right away in a barrel? Was that part of the process?
No. Okay. So that's an interesting question, and obviously, yes. There's no stainless steel hundreds of years ago. So yes, it absolutely went into cask. And again, this is why, us using a wine cask or Scotch whiskey using a wine cask is as inherent to our business as ever, because that's what we use. Probably the more precise question is you're asking is when did sort of deliberate aging going on? And that's hard to say. What we do know, you see, and especially with the case of Barbados, because Barbados has a very special history. So we were extremely dominant in the 17th century, caught up in the 18th century, but huge, absolutely huge. And then there was this little event called the American Revolution, and that totally screwed our export business, because we used to primarily export to America, and probably because we were earliest in the business and the American colonies were close, and Jamaica was primary to England. And so after the American Revolution, when you didn't want to trade with colonial England, we didn't have any identity as Barbados, we were colonial England. And don't forget also, the Americans were quite pissed that we didn't join the revolution. They were actually wanting us to also join the rebellion, but we still...
Yeah, what the heck, man?
Yeah. So they didn't want to buy Barbados rum. I mean, George Washington's inauguration, it was very controversial that he wanted a cask of Barbados rum. So in the 19th century, we were very poor.
Did you,
we
back
didn't
then,
have
did they
our...
tell him that single casks were not a thing?
No, it was not a thing. So we weren't doing much. We weren't doing any exporting in the 19th century. So there probably wasn't very much aging going on. But Jamaica certainly was. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of records and prizes. And yeah, Jamaica was definitely aging rum right through the 19th century. We probably... It's quite amazing. Prohibition had the effect of kicking off our export industry and Puerto Rico's export industry.
Sure.
So designed to stop drinking actually helped revive these industries.
You're welcome.
because we had to export huge amounts of rum to America during Prohibition. It was nominally recorded as shipped to Bahamas.
Sure.
And so then we would have got back into the aging game. It's hard to piece together. But certainly, I can definitely point to Jamaica, 19th century.
And is that because, like some other spirits, that it was being shipped in barrels and it aged it? Was it that type of, or was it again deliberate?
Oh no, it's definitely deliberate aging.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some wonderful ads for, Jamaica rum, turn of the century, and they even emphasized then it was aged in Jamaica. And then I think most of the rum nerds know all about the famous Ray and Nephew 17 during the Tiki era, and they used to use words like tropical age back then. So, but there are some caveats. For example, it was well documented by the famous chemist H.H. Cousins that a better grade of rum was exported for the simple reason, again, it's money. In other words, you could get more money from an English trader than what you sold to ordinary person in Jamaica. So
Sure.
A better grade of rum was exported. So, sometimes, I think it was Trader Vic that sort of made a reference that, the continentally aged Jamaican rums were superior. Okay, well, he has a preference, nothing wrong with that. If you take Scotch whiskey and age it in Patagonia, maybe you'll prefer that to Scotland. But it's not a level playing field. So there's it's not as straightforward as we think to compare.
You mentioned a historical precedence for a lot of your feelings on what you feel Barbados rum should be, or Jamaican rum, or any of what's happening right now with the GI. Are there not examples of things like you mentioned? There was no stainless steel back then, but now it's used quite often in current production. But that's not a faux pas. But added sugar is. Look, I'm not a huge fan of overly sweetened items, but I guess what I'm trying to do is I really want to. A long time ago, I learned that when it comes to debates, that if it's good to, even when you beat it to death, to have a debate.
No, it's fine. And it allows me, if you don't ask me the questions, I can't give the illustrate the answers.
It allows you to pull apart what you believe and either strengthen your foundation of what you already feel, or maybe change your mind.
Yeah,
I've had my mind changed.
there is disingenuous arguments about GIs, and one of them is this idea, and it's an invented concept. It's no one who actually wrote GI legislation had this in mind, but this idea that you can search through a history book and find some odd practice in there. They did that then, so therefore we must write that in GI. No, a GI is about preserving your reputation. It's not about finding everything that someone did. So what you do is you look and see what elements are creating the reputation, and I can give again some very good examples. And since Scotch whisky has had a very successful GI for many years, they're a very good way of illustrating it. So Scotch whisky has had every nefarious act that you can have as well, and I always laugh because in Barbados we would copy whatever they did. So you've had in the Scotch whisky, they used to add prune wine to young whisky to make it palatable. They used to add, and in Barbados we used to add glycerin. I think they used to add glycerin in Scotch whisky too. And then of course they had the sherry Paxarette, yes, recharging. So you have a lot of dodgy things. And of course, there we open that can of worms, caramel. And
it's a great example. I've often.
But I'll explain to you why then, why does Scotch whisky or Jamaica rum, for example, or Barbados rum say, no to glycerin, no to sugar, no to prune wine, and there's many instances I have first-hand experience. Not a historical record. It's in my lifetime, glycerin and prune wine. I know many blenders, and I know a few retired blenders as well. So this is
something you're familiar with.
Very. And so, but it would be totally disingenuous for me to go to the agency responsible for GI and say, oh, well, I can remember we used to use glycerin, so therefore glycerin's okay. So why did caramel get to be okay? Well, much of the reputation and incredible success of Scotch whiskey was driven by blended Scotch whiskey. And don't forget, so the first thing that happened with blending of Scotch whiskey was you no longer cask strength. So the merchant blenders would blend and they'd trade off flavor and profit. So you go down between 88 proof and 92 proof or 96 proof or
Sure.
something, and they will be balancing profit and flavor. Caramel is how you kept the true cask color.
Sure.
And then in World War I, everyone was forced down first to 43, 86, and then forced down to 40, 80 proof. If you want to know where 80 proof came from, it came from legislation. And so, of course, what you're doing now, you're being forced to water down your product, but you want to keep the color. And the success of blended Scotch whiskey is taking all these blends, but banging out this absolutely consistent product. And two elements to that consistency: chilled filtration and caramel color. It's a tiny amount, and it is regulated. You can't just dump in any amount of caramel color. So the Scotch whiskey regulators have the view, and it's shared by many of the producers. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are many people against the caramel. Share the view that the caramel color has played a role in protecting the reputation of Scotch whiskey as a consistent quality product.
As a protection.
Sure, but
Yeah.
image is part of the product. of
Correct.
course.
So the fact that your Johnny Walker Black looks absolutely pristine every single batch, every single time, is because of caramel and chill filtration.
Sure.
So the Scotch Whisky Association goes, you know what? We're going to allow caramel and chill filtration.
Now, you can say protecting the reputation, but an argument could be made, especially for the more seasoned, higher-end drinkers. You could say protecting the reputation or deceiving the customer in terms of color. Now, let me finish.
No, keep going.
Yeah, so we all know, and as you get, I mean, even I've seen even Foursquare ads promote a special bottling of something special, and say the words "no added color, just great rum."
Right.
There is a belief system among some of the more well-to-do drinkers who believe that caramel coloring is deceitful. I've even heard people laugh at Balvenie 50-year-old because it's a $38,000 bottle of 50-year-old Scotch that has caramel coloring. And so you could say it's done a great job of protecting the customer, or you could also make the argument that it's been deceiving average consumers so long because of their own, it's protecting them from themselves.
No, exactly. There's a reason why they add food coloring to certain products that we consume all the time. Like I feel like there was something about ketchup or something that, they make it red. You would think it's red just from tomatoes. And I could be wrong on this, but there was some product things like that, if you saw the gooey gray crap that we were actually eating,
Yes.
it would
Right.
be disgusting.
Sure.
It's...
No, that's another point about caramel color is, again, when you sometimes, look behind the curtain, what's the motivations? The motivation, because caramel color does not taste nice, the motivation behind caramel color, when it's done right, is about making it look pretty. Because one of the problems is that you take that lovely spirit out of the barrel, 65%, it's beautiful, and you go and add water to it, and it becomes dull and cloudy.
Sure.
So in comes chill filtration to get rid of that cloudiness, and in comes caramel to make it back pretty. So a lot of the motivation behind caramel is, just pure aesthetics. But to your point,
which affects your taste. When you
Yeah,
see something in
absolutely.
a color, you think of
but
something
to your
else.
point, absolutely, caramel color can be used to be deceived, and that's what we've evolved to. So you have this tool, caramel color, that can be used properly, and the regulations actually demand it's used properly, and we've put that in the draft GI as well. In other words, in theory, what you're supposed to do with caramel is you're supposed to only bring back the original color.
Not to overdo it.
And this is even part of EU regs, you're not supposed to affect the flavor. The moment you go beyond that, you're it's an illegal flavoring. So I think there is a perception that that caramel is widely used to deceive, and there's a perception that there's no restrictions on its use, and neither of those are true. So the thing is but yeah, do people use it to deceive? And certainly when you put it hand in hand with sugar, you've got the holy grail of ability to deceive, because caramel tastes very bitter. So if you now want to take this, and it also, if you use in excess, it does help the mouthfeel. So you take this very thin and unaged and not very good product, and you darken it up all nice and pretty, and then compensate for that bitter flavor.
And then you throw
sugar.
a 25 on the label that means
And then
nothing.
you throw in a 25, yeah.
And your thoughts
so-
on glycerin as well? You're not.
Oh no, we don't. Yeah, I mean, I would not.
Right. But I mean, I guess the same argument. What I'm trying to say is the same argument could be made that if you're trying to preserve the original
Reputation.
feel, well, right? But the original feel and the look of a product, because you've cut it down with water, I would imagine adding glycerin and caramel
Correct.
together.
Well,
would
glycerin
be
is
the same
about a
argument.
little bit about sweetening. Glycerin is about and creating that smooth.
I hate that word.
No, in other words, so what's happening, and we don't have to be disingenuous. We don't have to not use our intelligence. In other words, we are allowed to say, you know what, caramel has been used forever. There is a way of using it that's good, and so therefore we're going to allow it, and say no to sugar and no to glycerin and no to prune wine. In other words, we can use our discretion.
Sure.
So a lot of people do like to make the argument, oh, well, if you allow caramel, you must allow... No, we don't have
That's
to
the-
make the disingenuous argument.
The argument.
We can make the clever argument.
Sure. The argument of adulterants, right?
Yes.
It's technically an adult, because I've made that argument.
No,
that,
he's right.
The barrel finishing, like you, and I want to get to the subject of sweeteners, sugars. Whenever you have a wine barrel, it pulls more sugar from the wood.
Yes.
So you're essentially adding sugar in a roundabout way.
Yes, no, I did a post one time about the 4 levels of adulteration.
Sure.
And I
I
said...
save all of them, but it was a bit long for me to read on camera.
So
You talked about drying them
Yeah,
out
I mean,
and-
the thing is, we do what we do. I do caramel because my father did caramel and his father did caramel, and
but only on your cut products.
correct. And the thing is, you do what you do and you explain what you do, and the. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We were saying...
Adulterants. And
yeah,
wood
sorry,
sugar
the 4
from
levels.
Finishing,
So,
yeah.
so what I do is, if you say to me, is a wine barrel an adulterant? I'll say yes. If you say to me, caramel is an adulterant, I'm going to say yes. I'm not going to deny it. But it's been established, because as I say, in making of whiskey or rum, we inherited these barrels. So from day one, we were adulterant. But I like to describe the 4 levels of adulteration. So the first level is no adulteration. That's it never touched wood. That's the pure. So the flavor is 100% from the raw material.
Distillate, yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Provençal has a lot of unaged rum, and it's just...
that's if you're a purist, you won't find any argument from me.
Sure.
Personally, I like aged spirits, but yeah, that's if you want to taste sugarcane only, buy the unaged stuff, and long may unaged be available. So that's why we do, again, in the GI, we don't say rum has to be aged. There's a long tradition in the Caribbean of drinking unaged rum. Second level of adulteration is the new oak. So it's wood. There's definitely...
Adulterating.
Abs coming from it. There's wood sugars.
Sure.
You're putting water and alcohol in a wooden barrel. Both of those are wonderful solvents, and they're going to dissolve like crazy out of the wood. So that's level 2. Level 3 is using a refill cask, but from a spirit.
Like
So
an
that's-
ex-tequila barrel or...
So
cognac
that's
barrel.
I use an ex-bourbon barrel or I use an ex-cognac barrel. And
And can you talk about what you do with the barrel? And I know that you're getting to like wine barrels because
Yeah.
there's been discussion around, well, how much was there a little puddle of spirit left?
Sure, that's a good point. And this is all stuff you've addressed.
we'll get to that one.
Yeah.
So third level is, and the fourth level is if the product was a fermented product and not a distilled product. And
Sure.
so why do I distinguish those two? Well, in your mind, you distinguish them already. No one has ever accused me of using a wet bourbon barrel.
Sure.
So in people, we naturally, instinctively see a wine barrel as not being quite kosher with a distilled spirit. And there's a good intellectual underpinning for that, because, you know, when I put my rum in an ex-bourbon barrel, yeah, bourbon tastes different than rum. But, you know, the DNA, if you like, is 90.
Is it a color thing as well? Because, you know, wine, red.
Yes, yeah, the wine will definitely, because the wood will be stained just
Sure,
like your
yeah,
carpet.
yeah.
I mean, I peep in a wine barrel, the wood's red. But yeah, when you put in a cask that's had a distilled spirit, 99% of the compounds that are in the whiskey are in the rum. So you're still in the same zone. You know, what makes it taste like whiskey and what makes it taste like rum is a very small
percentage.
differences.
Yeah.
So that's why I call that a different level of adulteration, because when you put in a wine cask, you now have a fermented product, and there are components in there that will never be in your distilled spirit. So now you're extracting from the
So
wood.
this is, I mean, I know this is a pretty self-explanatory deviation or differentiation in those four levels, but you kind of like that new official, the Whiskey Exchange rum classification. This is your official classification of differences in those adulteration, or is this a widely held belief amongst
No,
many?
the whiskey classification is about classifying rum by how it's made. But
Sure, what I mean is-
but no, that's just me saying, listen, yeah, we don't deny. In other words, let's have an intelligent conversation about adulteration.
Correct, yeah.
In other words, we're not going to have a conversation, you know, with absolutism. In other words, that's not going to help anyone. And in other words, I'm not going to be disingenuous and say to you that you know, a rum that's aged in a sherry barrel is more adulterated than a rum than an unaged rum.
But
of course it is.
There's a clear delineation. Look at these two, Empery and 2007. You know, well, actually, this is sherry.
Yes, Empery's bourbon.
Right,
sherry,
okay.
yes. But what I can legitimately say to you is, using sherry cask is actually an older practice than using bourbon cask.
I mean, I think that's a fair assessment of that differentiation. I think in the past, you know, I've followed your posts and we've had discussions about it, and I've tried to play devil's advocate at times. But let's talk about sugar.
But I can actually understand, because you're coming from a culture where you use new oak. So I totally get that this
we're
jolts you a little bit.
No, it definitely doesn't. But we do.
That's actually the same thing when we go and we look at, and someone will say to me, well, cognac uses sugar. Okay, cognac uses sugar. That's great. But don't tell me because cognac uses sugar
that you have
rum
to.
must use sugar. And then don't tell me because bourbon uses new oak, I must use new oak.
Correct, yeah. It's all about
I'm
preference.
400 years old. We used wine barrels.
Yeah, well, the bourbon, the people who think about bourbon, it's that, well, you can't add anything to it. You know, it goes
Right.
in new oak, and you know, when you hear about other spirits adding anything, it's like, well, okay.
With
how can you
bourbon,
do
our
that?
perception is no adulteration other than bare wood, right?
Right.
And that's where I tried to play devil's advocate a little bit on the subject, because for us, we're very clear about no adulteration. Scotch allows for a little adulteration.
Correct.
They don't. We drew a line at coloring.
Correct.
They did not. So you make all fair points. It all comes down to what those countries, and more importantly those cultures, what they believe is a preference.
Exactly. If you can look, and you know, it's all about, you do what you do, and it's not just about saying what you do, but it's about understanding why you do the things. So, you know, we've learned why does American whiskey mostly done in a column still, and, you know, single malts in a pot still? Well, just look in your history books. Single malt's 200 years older.
Bourbon's better on a column still.
Well, but again, even better has become a product of your culture. You know, if I take a Barbados rum to Jamaica, they think it tastes funny. If I take a Jamaica rum to Barbados, they think it tastes funny. That's your culture.
Yeah, Jamaican's a bit different. Yeah.
So, you know, and again, that's so much why these things like GIs are important. I mean, you can't on one breath say you love one's diversity, and then on the other breath say, well, I don't want it to protect it because I want to change it. So I want to change how Barbados rum is made. I want to change how Jamaican rum is made.
How much of a historical precedence has to be there before you're okay with it? Like, where's your line at?
Again, it's one of these things that's, you know it when you see it. It's very hard to do. So let's take the added yeast, for example. So for most of rum's history, didn't add any yeast. Much later than other spirits because we're small, poor countries. And
when did we start?
It's very hard. I think Jamaica is about the 70s, 1970s.
Okay, so about 50
Barbados,
years.
I think, is a little earlier than that. Because, again, this is where other little things come in. You know, Barbados is very easy. If something's imported to the Bridgetown port, it's extremely easy to reach every single distillery. We're a very small, flat island. Jamaica's a little more remote, so you can see how certain methods. This is why, like, a Hampden has its methods so well preserved, because it's as far as we're concerned, like, Jamaica's a huge country.
Sure.
You might think it's small, and so take added yeast. So added yeast again, and it's interesting because we see added yeast as kind of like a good thing or a deliverer of flavor when it's actually the opposite. Added yeast is about efficiency.
Sure.
It's not about flavor. It's about choosing a flavor. But
you see brands like Buffalo Trace. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure that Buffalo Trace is probably the most famous and consistent bourbon producer in the U.S. that uses boxed yeast, and they've been adding it for quite some time. So I guess what my real question is that if added yeast, it's been about 50 years that it was real consistent in the Caribbean. If it was 100 years or 150 years, where would you be
exactly?
Okay with
That's the thing. You just have to use your discretion. So if we look at added yeast, we had more complex and more interesting and more flavorful fermentations when it was all natural. The most intense rums still on the planet today are from Hampden, which is a 100% natural fermentation.
I mean, Caroni was pretty good, freaking like rubber tire fire.
That's right. That's driven from a slightly different where the flavor is coming from. But Hampden's your textbook example of using native dozens of strains, and what you lose a little bit by added yeast. So what do you do when you come to write your GI? Do you sit down and go, I want us to go back in time. I want us to do all added yeast, all natural yeast. But practically you can't. That cat is out of the bag. So you have to let that in. And was it 50 years?
And you use all...
We do both.
We do both. You add yeast in.
We do... All the molasses is added yeast, and all of our cane juice is natural.
And you're okay... I may have misunderstood, but a while back you were saying in order to be... to hit those check boxes for Barbados.
Yes. So what happened is we've let one out the bag. We've allowing the Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast. So the way the GI is written is we said, okay, we're going to keep. You're going to be able to add any Saccharomyces yeast. And the reason for choosing the genus as opposed to Saccharomyces cerevisiae is that essentially Saccharomyces is this super efficient alcohol-making yeast. And so you're more or less saying, all right, listen.
It's meant for distillation.
We've let that cat out of the bag. So, we're allowing this efficiency tool. So go ahead, use any super efficient. And it's also about control of flavor. So, if you pick your yeast and that yeast dominates your fermentation, you know what you're going to get. I mean, I do my natural fermentations, and literally every crop is a new set of yeast strains. And so if you're living in the modern era of branding, that would drive that'll drive you crazy when you're supposed to be consistent. So what we've done is we said, okay, that we again
given a pass.
Yeah,
50 years precedence.
Correct, exactly. It's just not practical now to stop it.
Sure.
But let's close the door there. So sure, you can use non-Saccharomyces yeast, but they've got to be on the sugarcane.
So you're acknowledging that it essentially that would be an innovation that's worthy of being allowed.
Well, no. Most there are two huge innovations that most of us would look back and we sort of say, well, we can't turn back time now. And as I always love to say, you will never get the column still out of my cold dead hands. But realistically, if there are two innovations that we would have been better off without. One would be the column still, and one would be added yeast. And I'll actually give you a good another good example of how you can freeze. You do have some opportunities to freeze things in times, and it won't happen. But you take Haitian Clarin. It's 100% natural fermentation, 100% pot still. If I was writing the GI for Haiti, Clarin, I would freeze the hell out of that. Because guess what's going to happen? If Clarin's successful and Clarin starts to take off, you can bet your life added yeast and column stills, and neither one will be a good influence on the quality of Clarin over the next year.
So you're saying
it's so funky as is. It's just so different.
Oh, it's crazy. I've and you probably will judge me for this, but my first time trying Clarin, I tried it on air, totally unexpected. And I'm a huge funk fan. I love Hampton. I love Foursquare. I love rum. But the first time I tried Clarin, I did not care for it.
Even on the nose, I almost get like
I said ham juice. You know when you buy deli meats and there's like a wetness in the bag?
Ham juice.
There's like it reminded me of a ham, and I was completely caught off guard. And I love raw distillate. I love when you distill to a low enough proof that there's still tons of flavor from the raw distillate. I love that. I can drink. Maker's Mark makes a fantastic white dog. But even beyond bourbon, like rum or there's quite a bit of things out there. Like there's some great gins that are really light whiskey base or eau de vie base. Anyways, lost my train of thought.
But I think this is because it's still the natural
Your reaction
process.
to Clarin.
It's just like this is the stuff that people drink in Haiti, out in the.
Clarin caught me way off guard. So you're saying that you feel like if
I went back in time, I'd write a different GI.
If Barbados never had a column still or added yeast, that you feel like it would have been better off, even as great as the product is now?
Yes.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yes.
Well, okay, so let's go back a little bit. And I think this is where the differentiation.
And I love my column still.
Yeah.
I absolutely love my column still. I love the spirit it makes. But I know in my heart of hearts that if we made only in the pot still as an industry, as an artisanal product, as a way to scale the massive heights of spirit making, if we only had to use the pot still.
Well, have you done your own projects just in the pot still? I mean, I've seen the
the
2-year Velier.
No, everything, yes. In other words, we're very limited in what we've released as 100% pot still. And that's a function of the fact that we don't have a huge amount of pot still capacity, and that's a function of the style of Barbados rum evolved to be a blend, lighter rum.
Sure.
A blend, first and foremost, and a lighter blend than, say, our Jamaicans friends. So they will tend to have more pot still capacity than we do.
Have you thought about with the recent explosion in
I have a new pot still coming.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. The fact that a column still exists and became part of our culture means that I inherited less pot still capacity than if the industry had gone a different direction. Now, there's an argument that maybe the industry wouldn't have existed. And that's not a completely unfair argument, because I use the sugar industry as a good example of that. So what happened in the turn of the century, and this dramatically affected the rum industry. And the modern Barbados rum industry was born out of the reform of the sugar industry. And what used to happen was all the sugar estates used to crush their own cane and make their own sugar and make their own rum. And many of them didn't even make centrifugal sugars, so they were making this very wet artisanal sugar. And they were, distilling their own rum. And the reform of the sugar industry that took place around the turn of the century is what created the modern industry with, centralized factories, of which Foursquare became one. So in other words, Foursquare would grind cane not just from Foursquare estate, but from multiple estates. So all those multiple estates lost the ability to make rum. So this is how you saw in Jamaica. Jamaica went from 148 distilleries turn of the century to the 6 today. And Barbados before the turn of the century is about 75 distilleries, to 4 today. It was this revolution of the industry, and the interesting thing to look back is that it's this modern commodity sugar industry that we cannot compete in, because Barbados is a very successful society. We're a very aspirational society, so we pay people fair wages, and we're one of the more developed countries, and so we can't compete with the Central America and South America where they pay people $200 a month. We don't do that, so we can't compete in commodity sugar. But if those little estates had survived making artisanal sugars, they'd probably be still alive today. They'd be profitable today.
There'd be demand for it, yeah.
So there's an argument that says, well, if we'd preserved this artisanal rum industry through the hard times of the 1950s and 60s when everyone started to drink rum and Coca-Cola, maybe we would have not survived at all. So speaking of sugar, that's got a bit of a more historical precedence in the last 50 years. And it seems to be pretty popular for some producers. What is your inherent frustration with added sweeteners? Well, there's no question for me. You can look, when you look at caramel and you can see, legit producers like Mangay or Appleton or using color and they're not abusing it and stuff.
For how long?
But when you see sugar, well, yeah, I'll give out the story. I'll have to make a very interesting point about caramel as well, because today we use it as Scotch whiskey does, but historically it was quite different. The thing about sugar is you can see this correlation between the heavily sugared rums, and again, it's not an absolute, but you can see a mass-produced product, a bogus age statement, in a fancy package, and loads of sugar. Go to the more traditional producers, whether it's Appleton, Mangay, Nissan, Clément, you don't see sugar because it's not part of our history and culture. But it's not been created to deceive. So the thing about the sugar is, the way I like to tell the story is that, there's a couple of things we aspire to be. The first thing we aspire to be is mature. So it's like your first taste of Clarion was horrible. Maybe your first taste of whiskey was horrible. And so one of the things we aspire to, many of us, is to drink straight spirits.
Just to acclimate, yeah.
Yeah. So when the guy puts the sugar in there and you believe you're drinking a straight spirit, and now you believe you are reached the maturity of drinking a straight spirit, he has
duped you. So
then the other thing that we do is we also aspire to have good taste. So if you're presented with this product and it's beautifully packaged and it's very expensive and it has this huge ornamental number on it and you like it, you believe you've acquired good taste. So,
but isn't
so
good
the difference
taste objective though?
Yeah.
Isn't good taste objective? I've seen in the rum groups where someone posts Plantation 30 and people are like, oof.
Yes, no, absolutely. But you believe you've acquired it because you really love this super premium, expensive product. And maybe you would not have loved it if it didn't have the 20 or 30 grams
Is
of
it
sugar.
at all an entry point? Because to make a comparison to bourbon, if somebody's new to the spirit, I don't throw them 120 proof cask strength bourbon. I may give them, like with rum, with thinking about my wife, I'd give her something sweeter, just to get her used to the spirit,
right, and
start to pick up the notes.
And that's an absolute fair point. However, what's wrong with that being labeled rum liqueur? And saying
nothing.
To her,
yeah.
Is that what you'd prefer? If there's added sugars, rum liqueur?
Yeah, again, all of this is about semantics. All of this
semantics are so
semantics.
important, though.
Yes.
And when you
so
say
it's like when you
semantics,
say to me, you has to be this way. Yeah, because it's bourbon.
Well, and this is why I think it's another reason why it's important. And I was going to talk in a broader sense about rum and why is rum growing in popularity, and how do people get into Foursquare from your typical person. When I mention rum to them, they think a cocktail with Bacardi, or and it's going to be a sweet cocktail. They're like, yeah, I don't like rum; it's so just sweet. And I'm like, well, okay, hold on, this is not what you're used to.
But again, to follow on this point about there's nothing wrong with liking sweet things.
Sure.
And
like
here,
my wife.
And and here is this almost this tragedy, is, again, and it comes back to this perception thing. So we see, in the last couple of years, this demand for sweet spirits. Things, well, I don't want to call any names, but, there's some sweet brands out there that sell very, very well.
I know you're being very professional and you're staying on point, but I think I'll say it. I think there's this elephant in the room when it comes to plantation and in Alexandria.
No, but there are other brands that sweeten and sell really well.
Right, which is where I'm kind of trying to
But my point is, they've had a growth and great perception, and for me the tragedy is there's some fantastic, genuinely artisanal, sweet things out there that are declining.
You mean that are not
sherries, Madeiras,
sure,
ports, sauternes.
Love them. Fantastic stuff.
So and again, it gets back to this perception. The reason why someone is jumping on a sweet spirit is because he believes he is drinking a quality spirit, and the reason why they're shunning a Madeira or a sherry is that those are the sweet things, and we sweet things are for people with not good palates.
Sure.
So this is a tragedy.
But okay.
Because those are beautiful products, and there's nothing wrong with loving a sweet Madeira wine.
I'm not. I love Madeiras. I've talked about them constantly. I'm a huge fortified wine fan. But could you not make the argument that let the marketplace decide what they prefer?
Yes, but those are rum liqueurs, and so semantics is important.
But why?
All of this comes back to semantics. So if you write 10-year-old Barbados rum, it's a Barbados rum as made by Barbadians.
I'm 100%.
10 years old means 10-year-olds in the Caribbean. But again, if you're creating a product and you've decided, look, I want that distillate from Barbados. I want to age it in Patagonia. I've decided that that's the perfect climate. I want to add my secret sauce. I think this rounds it out perfectly.
Sure.
You can do all those things. What you can't do is then fool someone that it's something it's not.
So, okay, let me pose something to you.
So yes, for me, it's a bit of a tragedy that someone is drinking a sweetened spirit. They don't know they're drinking a sweetened spirit. And someone is not drinking, and they love sweet taste. They love the sweetened spirit. It's what they love. And they're shying away from a sweet product like a Madeira or a port because of perception.
So this
is totally upside down.
Clarifying your stance on a few things. You're okay with a port finished or sherry matured rum, as now you specifically have stated in the past that you don't have juice in the barrel.
Correct.
You bring it in. Oftentimes, I think
I put some pictures recently. My sauternes.
I think and they were dry as a bone. And you even said that you steam them as well. Like sometimes.
That's a judgment call. Just go back. So we use bourbon barrels, and we generally steam the bourbon barrels. That's pretty routine. When we get other spirit barrels, like a cognac barrel, we will make a judgment call. The reason why the bourbons are steamed is because the bourbons you're not always sure the gap between emptying and when you get it. If I go and I buy a specific set of cognac barrels from a producer, I'll know. So I'll make a judgment call so I'm talking with a distilled spirit, so high alcohol. So those barrels are generally, when they arrive, they smell fine because there's not as much potential to go off.
The alcohol, yeah.
To give the other extreme now, I've been in recent years buying some wine barrels, not fortified wine barrels. So I've been taking, and the reason why I've been doing those is to get the French oak. So I'm buying some French oak barrels that totally unaffordable for me, new. So I buy them from the wineries. And, it's not about the wine, it's about the French oak. But yes, we want the seasoning. So the fact that it's had wine for a couple of years,
sure. Great,
that would season some more. And those, absolutely 100%, always steamed. And I don't want to give away all my secrets,
sure.
There's
really
a bit of preparation on those,
yeah.
because they are much more high risk. And so there's a real risk that if you put rum straight into a wine barrel, and it started to go off,
soured or
or it was
whatever,
a sulfured barrel or something, you'd be in a disaster. But anything in between those two is a judgment call. The sauternes, for example, where I asked the Chateau to steam them, give them just a, and I think either steam or a little hot water. And when they arrived at me, they were perfect. The nose on them was fabulous. And yes, they're dry, but you smell them. I mean, that wood is permanently affected. So we did not steam them on arrival.
So, okay, so the whole reason I asked that question is to clarify, you make sure that when you receive barrels, they're not wet per se, meaning a puddle or...
No, sometimes that will happen because, and I do laugh because I've seen it increasing. Because what will happen is it all depends. Barrels go through coopers, they buy them in, they rehoop them, so they're there with them for a little time, and they will pour a little sherry in to make sure they stay moist, because if they dry out completely and get musty, they're no more good.
Sure.
So we have had instances where the barrels have arrived and there's a little liquid in them.
Right, and when that happens,
we pour it out because that liquid does not taste very nice.
Do you prefer, in your designation of adulterations and what you guys would prefer to happen with Barbados rum, is it built into the GI? The reason why I'm asking is this: there's a guy that was I'll say he's a Texas distiller that was outed a few years ago. He is aging brandy, his brandy in a cognac barrel. In a cognac barrel that had several gallons of cognac in there.
I don't get any of this free cognac.
So what I'm really trying to understand is that is really ultimately a blend of brandy and cognac.
Yeah.
If sugar's bad, and adulterated, the certain sweeteners, or when there's a line for you, because there's clearly a line in a lot of things. If there was another distillery in Barbados that wasn't French owned, that was native, and there might be, I don't know, I'm just kidding. If they wanted to bring in a wine barrel that had 5 gallons of sherry in it, throw the rum in and mature it, would that be allowed? Are you okay with that? Or would that be just as offensive as adding sugar?
Again, that's where you start to draw your own lines. And I'll give you an example, and I hope they don't mind me calling names, but there's a rum in Puerto Rico, Barrilito, that's made with, and they're open about it, they macerate fruit and add that to the rum.
During distillation?
During aging. They actually don't distill. They buy and distill it, and they age in sherry barrels. And
they macerate the barrel.
They macerate some fruits and create some kind of flavoring, and they add it.
And for those who aren't aware, maceration is essentially like putting, typically like with gin, when you macerate, you put those botanicals directly, you create a tea. And so you're saying they put actual fruits in the barrel during aging.
They do a maceration and then add the result of that. I mean,
sure.
They know. But the point is, it's definitely a flavored product.
Sure.
Well, but here's the question, though. When you have, when you say if there's 5 gallons of anything in there, it's touching a lot of wood. It's a small amount of liquid, and you said it can taste horrible. So why...
whether or not it tastes good is not the point. The point is that it's an adulteration that borders...
No, with a wine that's been shipped for weeks out to the Caribbean, wine. I mean, cognac will be fine. Cognac's high proof. It's 40%. It's not gonna. That's gonna still taste great. Probably taste better.
Right. I'm just trying to find that line.
Right, exactly. So I want to illustrate a very interesting point. So by European definition, that's flavored rum. So if they take that product and they sell it in Europe, applying on the EU rules, they have to call it, spirit drink or whatever. But suppose Puerto Rico said, no, I'm going to create a GI. And in my GI, Puerto Rican rum allows maceration.
Sure. You can call it Puerto Rican rum. That's different
the
than calling
EU
it rum.
will decide, because they're the ones that decide whether they're going to recognize this GI. And the thing about recognizing a GI, they will look to see if the conflict with their rules is severe enough, they may deny it. But let's say, for argument's sake, they accepted it. That would mean that Puerto Rican rum could be flavored and sold as Puerto Rican rum.
Sure.
And that's kind of the whole point of the GI. It's about recognizing what. So yeah, if we did have a tradition in Barbados of macerating fruits in rum, and different to glycerin, we felt that was a contribution to the reputation and Barbados rum, particularly if it was more than one producer. See, this is the key too. You know, if every Barbadian producer was like, this is what we do in Barbados, we add some macerated fruit, yeah, you would write a GI that said, this is how we make Barbados rum. But you still would be at the mercy of, say, the EU, whether they recognize it. And you would also still be at the mercy of the TTB, because let's say you added, TTB does allow flavoring up to 2.5%. But suppose your process, hit 3%. The TTB would have the ability to say, no, I'm sorry, that's not rum. So, these things, none of these things are black and white. It's about, the fundamental truth is about, you have to establish what your product is. So this is what Barbados rum is. This is what Jamaica rum is. This is what cognac is. This is what Scotch whiskey is. And then you have to turn around and ask where you're selling it, whether they recognize it.
Sure.
And yeah, it's about drawing lines. And the EU may say, no, we have a fundamental rule that says rum shall not be flavored, which is their base rule. And they may say, no, we're not going to recognize that GI.
So, and final question. I know we ran long today, but I think people would enjoy it. If essentially fortified wine or a spirit aged in a cask, right? They take distillation, put it in a cask, they let it age, then they take that remaining cask, put rum in it. You are fine with the secondary cask. Dosage is essentially barrel aging sugar water, essentially, and if someone were to obviously dump that barrel out, bring that empty dry barrel of, a barrel-aged sugar water that was aged in that barrel to the Caribbean, to Barbados, put rum in it, and essentially it was like a secondary cask finish of
No, that actually won't be allowed. So the way the GI is written is that, and this is the other very important catch with the recent relaxation on Scotch whiskey, you have to have a cask from a recognized denomination.
Oh.
Yeah. So, for example, Scotch whiskey would never allow an ex-aged gin cask, or I should say under the existing rules, because it's not a tradition of gin to age.
Sure.
So no, you can't go and take a barrel under the way we've written the GI,
right,
and buy a new barrel and put some stuff in it and roll it around. No, the history of Barbados rum is using refill casks, and so we want to continue that tradition, but it has to be from a recognized
so you could do like a Cabernet or a Merlot barrel.
You'd have to buy it from Burgundy, or well, not Cabernet, but Bordeaux, or you'd have to buy it. In other words, it'd have to come from a recognized denomination.
That's a very interesting point.
Yeah,
and fair.
Yeah, because and again, that's the history. In other words, and we don't think that history is negative to our reputation, because again, I stress. I mean, Criterion, for example, one of the first that was successful here. I use it's a good illustration of a number of points, because Criterion used ex-Madeira casks. And so, some people say, oh, well, you're very innovative. You use Madeira casks. It's like, no. The first thing to understand is that people were putting rum in Madeira casks 400 years ago.
Sure.
Madeira was a very important stop on the way to Barbados, and being Portuguese, it was a friendly port for the English. So if you went to planters in Barbados in the 17th century were extraordinarily wealthy, and they lived short, decadent lives. And if you went to their magnificent plantation homes, you would have almost certainly drunk Madeira wine. So you can't find a bottle of Madeira wine in Barbados now, but historically it was there. But the motivation for me to going out and buying a Madeira wine cask is a very old-fashioned motivation. I just want a really good cask.
Sure.
And the fact that it's a Madeira cask for me, adds a little bit of legitimacy to it. And then the thing about Criterion was, to your point of wet barrels, they were second fill Madeiras. Their last fill was rum. So to the extent they were wet when they were filled, that liquid around was rum.
Yeah.
In Principia, for example, again, was very old sherry barrels. They had multiple fills of rum before. And I make that point not just to rebut the wet barrel point, but to actually emphasize it's about buying really, really good casks. And if you have a really good cask, you can use that cask for many, many years, many different fills. And it's not about that liquid. And then just to sort of emphasize the point about, you make the point about sugar. Well, we actually, the Madeira we use is the Madeira cask is quite sweet, but take the sherry cask that we use, for example, like Empery. It's Oloroso. It's not a very sweet sherry, less than 5 grams of sugar. But even let's say if you use PX, the first year or two you'll get 0.2 to 0.3 a gram of sugar.
Sure.
So after 1 or 2 years, you might have a gram of sugar at cask strength
added to it. Yeah.
Yes, correct. And don't forget there's some other wood sugars as well. It's still an order of magnitude different than someone throwing in 20 grams of sugar, not slowly extracting it, over years. And I think there's nothing wrong with recognizing that difference. In other words, we don't have to be disingenuous. We don't have to say, you age in a sherry barrel, that's the same as adding sugar.
Sure.
Not the same. And we can recognize these differences. But I've had many, and I see this more on the American side, where I see someone write, I think the Foursquare rums are outstanding, but I don't care for the wine finishes. And the amusing thing for me is that shows me they actually haven't actually bought any of the wine cask ones, because they would know they're not finishes. But that's fine, because I understand the culture they've come from.
Would that necessarily be that they haven't bought it, or just that they are under a gross misunderstanding? Like there's a very common level of ignorance, and I mean that simply not knowing any better because of uneducation on the subject.
No, but there's
average consumer.
There's some Scotch whiskies that are very, very sherried, and some of the Scotch whiskey guys say, no, I don't like that, and that's fine. What you can't say is Scotch whiskey shouldn't be in a sherry barrel, because Scotch whiskey's been in a sherry barrel forever. If you don't like the ones in a sherry barrel, don't buy them. And in other words, what should never happen is that you age a rum or a whiskey in a sherry barrel and you don't tell people that you've done that.
Do you guys ever do seasoning for your barrels? Like if
No.
it comes in, there's not quite enough in it, we
No.
just throw some in?
No, quite the opposite. In other words, we love how they get older. So, as I say, I'll get a set of first fill Madeiras. We put rum in them. And then when we refill those Madeiras, they'll behave differently now that they're...
Sure.
And we love that. And the other thing that we've started to do is rechar. So we'll take our oldest bourbon barrels. I mean, I hate that word neutral. I've never met a neutral barrel in my life. So, older barrels play a very important role. Something like 2007 has been aged as a blend of, first fill, second fill, third fills. So older barrels play a vital role for me. But one of the things we're also able to do is to take a very, very old bourbon barrel, and it's about managing, so, I have more older barrels than I need, so guess what? Let's take it and go and rechar it. And that recharred barrel, even though we shave it and in theory remove the previous content,
Sure.
it's amazing that recharred barrel is very different to the original charred barrel.
Sure.
Somehow, even though those contents only going
So far into the wood.
mostly so far, there is a small influence that goes quite deep.
Sure.
And the aroma that you get when you rechar these barrels is absolutely amazing. And it's not the same as aging in a charred barrel, like a new bourbon barrel, which I've
Right.
done. And obviously it's not the same as a refill bourbon barrel, because now in theory you've removed all the bourbon and the rum, but in practice you don't.
It speaks a lot to the complexity of these, that to know that it's
They're
not just put into it's not just an ex-bourbon barrel. It's, as you said, it could be a first fill, a second, or third, or who knows.
In other words, when we go to pull together
Recharge.
2007, what we'll do is we'll look at what we have and we'll start to build it in a vat. So we'll pull some of these barrels, some of these barrels, some of these barrels, build it in a vat, have a taste. Okay, all right, let's pull some more of those third fills and then build up. Okay, no, maybe it needs a little more of the first, and we'll build it up.
What couple of quick, easy questions. How many barrels do you guys have currently aging? Or is that proprietary? You don't have to answer. Buffalo Trace doesn't like to say it, but Beam's like, yeah, we have.
We say it for some reason that you, in theory, could walk there and make an estimate, so there's no point hiding it. We have about 40,000 barrels. Just a little over 40,000 barrels.
That seems so minuscule compared to the impact you've had globally. You guys.
We're small. Don't worry. We're still a very niche player. Don't. Yeah, I mean, for sure, a lot of the bourbon guys, and I've had this.
One of the rick houses.
I've had this. Correct.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with some of my bourbon friends, and they sort of say, if the bourbon guys turn on rum, we're in deep trouble. And I think that's also why people worry that there are some people who worry that the rum prices could explode because, Appleton's probably the biggest of the West Indies, and I think they're about 200,000 barrels or something. But I hope I haven't quoted them wrong.
Sure.
Compared to bourbon, we're tiny. But yes, we are tiny.
Doing a great job with what you got. I don't think of you guys as tiny at all, and I don't think anyone else would. What's the oldest thing you've got aging?
So the oldest that's still in a barrel is 2004.
15.
So some of that was pulled. We do fat as well. So some of that was pulled from barrel to make things like Emperor and Hereditas and stuff last year. That turned 14 last year. So I can potentially do a 15 this year. I'll see. But if I would, I may want to blend it with something younger, and then it won't be.
Do you have an idea of the limit yet? Where's it? Is it what do you at 17, 18, where you would have just a product that's not a blend?
Have you ever tasted 20-year-old Foursquare?
Yes. Nicholas Abbey kept some that they had bought from me at 10. The thing is to appreciate that. If you're going to make a rum for 20 years, not necessarily the same rum that you would have made to be good at 8 or 9 or 10. So it doesn't mean that the 2004 I want to take the 20, because maybe that spirit is not what I want. Whereas there's some other spirit that is much younger now, but I know can go way longer. So it'll be a judgment call. But one of the things I do hate is this idea that you can't age rum for very long. That's nonsense. If you age a rum and you found that it's very bad, it's too woody or whatever, then you've screwed up. Just because you got it wrong doesn't mean it can't be done.
So in Texas bourbon, there are certain distillers that are taking steps to slow the aging because it's happening too fast, getting too woody. Is there anything that you do if you think that it's you want to slow it down?
That sounds to me really stupid.
To go bigger?
To go slow down.
Well, that's what they're doing. Yeah, so traditionally speaking, 53-gallon barrels for Kentucky. Originally, Texas was doing small barrels, 5-gallon barrels. They thought it was speeding up the process. But even though you'd be getting a lot of the wood extraction, you're not getting any of the mellowing or filtration.
No, that's just stupid.
So they're going the opposite way. And I've had this theory for a while, talking to a couple Texas distillers. Instead of slowing down, or instead of speeding up the process, going to a bigger size barrel.
Oh, bigger size barrel is fantastic.
Yeah,
yes.
And
no, I don't call that slowing it down, because
just
you're
less
not
wood
slowing
interaction.
down the oxidation. Yes, you're changing the surface ratio, but you're not necessarily. Sorry, when you say slowing down, I thought literally like cooling it or something.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, no.
There are some
My absolute favorite barrel size is a 225 liter, and so I give you a funny story. So I reached out.
60 gallons, right?
Yeah. So I reached out to. So actually, I was having this conversation with Maggie Privateer. And she suggested, because I said I really love 225s, and she was like, well, why don't you go and buy some? And so I spoke with one of my guys that supplies me barrels, and I'm like, I want a 225 liter barrel, new oak. And when he showed me the price,
It's like $400-$500.
so what we did is we compromised what he did, because in other words, I was visiting Maggie at Privateer, and of course, being new distiller, she had a lot of new wood. And I'd done some new wood in years past, which went into things like triptych and stuff. But going through and having a wonderful tasting with Maggie and really great conversation, I thought, well, I'll do some new wood again, And then I said to Maggie, I'm going to do it 225 liter though. I'm not going to do 200 liter. And yeah, when I saw the price, I cried.
Yeah, Balcones switched to 60-gallon barrels, and I think you said they're paying like $450 a barrel.
Yeah. And
It's
so
ridiculous.
what I did then in the end, I bought some 6-month-old bourbon barrels. So the idea is I'm trading a slightly more newer barrel,
Sure.
going to get some more of those new wood oak, but I'm not going to my dream of 225 liter.
Sure.
When you're talking about, absolutely. I mean, I love 225 liter. I love 350 liter. I do wish bourbon barrels were bigger. Yeah, definitely.
So last question, and then we've got to go. What's coming next? What can we talk about? The people who are hunting cola labels may eventually see before. So you've triptych and Prince. Like what's the next special thing?
So
coming
right
up
now,
for you guys?
you'll probably get fairly imminently announced, and people don't panic. The trouble is, when you announce something, it's quite a while before it hits the shelf. So if the guys are just finished buying Empry, they don't necessarily want me to announce the next one.
Sure.
Because they don't necessarily realize, don't panic, guys, it's not going to be on the shelf.
It's
for,
like 6 months, 8 months. Yeah.
So don't, but they see it announced and they worry it's going to be on the shelf.
It's okay.
tomorrow.
No one watches this, so you can just say.
So right now we are working on, and they're going to be imminently announced, the successor to Patrimonio with the Velier, and the successor to Primus in the ECS range. And
Do you know what they're called?
yes, I do know what they're called. I'm tempted to give you one of them,
Give me one. Give me
what
one.
I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you that we are, during the next couple of days, going to, in a very subtly way, release the next name of the next one. And this rum is going to be, so what we've tried to do...
Is it subtly? Is that the name of it? You just slipped it into your
Not
sentence there,
quite, not quite. So what we try to do with the ECS range, yes, it's the Cask Strength range and stuff, but we still try to make one a little more approachable. So, there was Port Cast, and there was Zin Cast, and there were Premise, not quite Cask Strength, a little more sweeter and softer and fun.
Sure.
But we're also trying to move them up to be a little more of a bridge to the big boys. So the next one's going to be 48, 96 proof. And
the successor to
Primus.
Primus, which was 46 proof.
Correct.
Or 46%.
92 proof. So it's going to be. So in other words, I'm giving you the gateway to the big boys. But not everyone will ever drink Cask Strength. So you always have to have one there in the range that's a little more accessible. But I think what I'm going to do is, I've done some initial blends, but I'm going to make it. In other words, I'm sucking you in. So yes, it'll be a little more approachable than 07 and Empry, but it's still going to be, let's say, more complex than Premise.
Okay.
So I'm trying to.
And Premise is great, but yeah, I mean that's one that I use to people who are if I want to get them
Exactly.
started.
In other words, so some of the
Premise.
guys who love my 2005 and Dominus, they will say, "Well, Premise," because Premise has been deliberately meant to be nice and soft and sweet and easy.
Sure. I prefer Dominus over Primus.
Yeah, and so and that's fine. I mean, the one thing I love about the ECSs and doing the Veliers is how provocative the opinions they are. Because if I did a set and everyone agreed, on what was the best one, then that would tell me that I made one rum significantly better than the other. There's nothing more fun to me than someone says to me, well, I like Principian and I like 06 and I like Criterion.
Sure.
But is the rum crowd growing? Like we've seen the bourbon enthusiasts
sure.
go from 90 proof was the standard. It was 80 proof and
80
90 proof,
proof
and now
was the
it's like
original
now everyone's
standard,
like, well, maybe 110.
And now Armagnac is seeing a bit of a comeback because of the Cask Strength offerings from Lincoln.
So is it a matter of what's better? What have you done better?
I think it's very
approachable.
important. Cask Strength is one thing, but there's a technique you have to learn with drinking it. So not necessarily everyone's cask strength, but the point I want to teach people about is that 40% was nothing ever chosen by a distiller. There's a history behind that, and no, I don't know of any distiller that would really volunteer desirably to sell at 40%. I find that once you get
It's
below
very common
46,
in bourbon, though. It's like it's the moneymaker in bourbon.
yeah,
But what's
once you get below 46 to 48, you start to break the balance on the spirit. You start to negatively affect the spirit more than just dilution. And that's why historically the Scotch whiskey blenders used to be in that zone. And so, you know, that's why the ECS, I don't necessarily have to do them all cask strength. But what I absolutely will always do is break away from 40%.
Well, what's interesting about the 40% is that when you're younger and you first drink something that's 80 proof, your palate has to get used to that. It's acquired.
Rough, yeah.
But the human
It makes
palate
it
can
Coke.
handle a lot. And it's a shame that people are so accustomed to the 80, and then they have to build rather than let's just start at 100. Let's get you started on a 100 proof.
Well, I
spirits.
think, one of the things, again, that I don't like to hear is, like age doesn't matter and things like that. And I think because we're drinking things at 80 proof, 40%, we've lost the appreciation for maturation. Mm-hmm. So, people will say to me, how is 2005 so soft? And I just go, it's time. There's no mystery there. I didn't reinvent anything. I just used the same technique that's been used forever.
Sure.
Time. And the trouble is when you drink 40% spirits, you lose that. But once you're drinking cask strength spirits, you will see the difference between a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. We have hit 2 hours.
Oh dear.
Yeah, this is great. It really was great. And
Okay.
and Richard.
Well, the worst thing is you keep the rums flowing, so that only makes it
that's
want to go on.
Worst thing. That's the best part of this.
Yeah, well, it's not a good recipe for a short conversation.
That's what's so beautiful about this is I'm not ever looking for a short conversation. You learn a lot. I understand you better. That's what this is all about. So I really can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you coming and doing this, and then just being so open and kind of just kind of helping us understand the perspective of Barbados. I think it's fair to say that you speak, at least maybe not speak for everyone, but you do speak. You're aligned with what others in the same.
We probably don't do it enough, but there's a tremendous, and it's because we're small. There's a tremendous camaraderie. There's a tremendous fraternal grouping between the traditional producers. You'll see us hanging out at events like this, and
Sure.
Obviously I'm extremely close with Hampden and Worthy Park, but we're all we're very close with the Spirit Bam guys, Clement, St. Lucia. We're very close. As I say, last night I was hanging out with Joy and drinking Jamaican rum, and
it's one of my favorite. I love Barbados. I love Foursquare, but man, Jamaicans. I have a romance with that funk, man. That funk is everything. So we've got to go.
Yep.
But thank you so much. They brought us some food, so after we turn the camera off, if you want a bite of something, we can chow down a little bit. But thank you guys so much. I'll record some introductions here in a little bit, and cheers.
Thank you.